Sometimes we really do have control over the situation. It doesn't matter if you really have it or really don't have it. All that matters is what you believe. See, stress is only inside your system. It's never out there. It's only how you perceive something. That's it. That's actually a pretty empowering message as well. Stress is all about this perception of control. That's really it. So if I'm a note taker, stress is about control. Let's dig into this idea just a little bit more. Now, some stress is good for us, some stress is not good for us. In the short term, stress is actually pretty good. In the short term, when cortisol and adrenaline are floating around the system because you need some kind of control, and it only lasts for a short period of time, that's the good thing. But when it happens a lot, when it stays around in our system for a long time, we call that chronic stress or distress. Here's an example. Imagine we are all at an amusement park like Disneyland, and we're waiting in line to get on a roller coaster, right? If you have to wait for 20 minutes and the line is really long and you're at the end of the line and it's going to be 20 minutes before you get on the roller coaster, you're probably relaxing, you're probably on your phone, you're probably having a chat with someone you're with, maybe you're having a snack, you're pretty relaxed. But the closer you get to the front of the line, you feel everything change just a little bit. Because the closer you get to the lack of control situation, the situation where I don't know what's going to happen, even if you've ridden that roller coaster before, something happens, something changes in your system. You put your phone in your pocket, you tend to start watching the facial expressions of the people getting off the roller coaster. You're listening and tuning into sounds a little bit more. You kind of get yourself ready. You feel your body change because your body is saying we're about to enter a situation where we don't know how much control we're going to have. Then you get on the roller coaster, you sit down, they put that bar over your lap, and you go and you are on the roller coaster for what, maybe 2 minutes? And then you're off. And when you step off that roller coaster, if you've ever been on a roller coaster, your legs are kind of wobbly for just a moment and you're like tense, and then you walk it out and you're like, oh, you recover from that stressful event. And a lot of us say, that was amazing, let's go do it again. See, stress in the short term, like riding roller coasters, great. But can you imagine how out of your mind crazy you would be if you were on a roller coaster for like 4 hours? A 4-hour roller coaster is way too long. A 2-minute roller coaster is just right. When stress hangs around in our systems for too long, that's the problem. I wanted to share something with you before we go on. I mentioned we're geeking out on this brain stuff. If you like to learn about this brain stuff, you're in the right session. Have you noticed what's over my shoulder? Look at the camera if you're not already. Have you noticed what's over my shoulder on my bookshelf? In fact, hold on, let me get it for you. This is really cool. I love this brain stuff so much. I actually own a human brain. This is a real human brain, not a fake one, not a model, a real hemisphere of a human brain. Now, if you know anything about brains, real brains are kind of squishy and mushy. This has been injected with some epoxy, so it's kind of like a hard rubber in consistency. But this is so cool. I love this brain stuff so much. I actually own a human brain. So that's a really good joke, actually. Even a better joke is I have half a brain, because I only have half a brain, one hemisphere of a brain. So what I'm sharing with you is a little bit about what we understand from the perspective of the human brain. Short-term stress, not really an issue. Long-term stress, that's the issue. Now let's nerd out on this scientific stuff just a little bit more. Why is this important? Because the more you know about what happens in your system, the better you can be prepared to manage the stressors when they come along. So let's go all the way back to our biology class. In biology, you learned a term called homeostasis. Homeostasis is what organisms, including human bodies, like to be at. And that is kind of this stable system that just everything's functioning fine. Kind of on a level, everything's functioning fine. We call that homeostasis. It's kind of this system-wide set where you optimally perform. So here's what happens when we are stressed. We're going along in life. If you're not looking at the camera already, look at the camera for a moment. You're going along in life and bam, something happens to you where you perceive that you don't have the kind of control you want or need. And then boom, your brain says, okay, if you need control, here are the resources you need. Here's cortisol and adrenaline. They'll help you get control back. So you have a spike in cortisol and adrenaline. That's the middle line that you see right there in the middle, from the blue dotted line to that spike. You deal with whatever is stressing you out. and then you recover. That's called homeostasis, where you have something happen to you, but you recover. A good example in the world is like a forest fire, right? You see a beautiful forest and it has a fire, that forest recovers from that stressor. That's what it was designed to do. Living organisms are designed to recover after a stressor. This is the healthy way to respond to stress. You go along in life, bam, something happens, you deal with it, and you get back to normal. Now, because some of us are victimized by things where we have traumas in our past experiences or things happen to us over and over and over, there was a researcher a couple of decades ago who came up with a brand new term. He called it allostasis. Allostasis is this idea that no longer do we recover back to normal, no longer do we do one of these. We have something happen, we deal with the event, and then we recover back to normal. Some of us, because we've had all kinds of crud happen to us in life, we actually have our whole system responding to stress adjust. Allostasis means adjusted. Homeostasis means you get back to same. Allostasis means it gets adjusted. Because things happen to us, sometimes they happen over and over and over and over again. Sometimes they're big things that knock us back. Those things rewire our brain's stress response. Here's another way to look at it is we all have kind of a set point for how our brains function best. When you're under a lot of stress and you're worried about your survival constantly, your brain kind of resets itself. Rather from dealing with the stressor and getting back to healthy normal, it resets to a different normal. And that different normal isn't always a good thing. Here's another way to look at it. I know we're getting into the weeds on this stuff, but this is so interesting to understand how our brains work. Before I give you the strategies, which is coming, I promised you 5 things. If you do these 5 things, you'll manage your stressors better. We have to know a little bit about where this is coming from. So rather than homeostasis, some of us, because we're under so much stress, our whole system has been adjusted or changed. Sometimes we're what we call hypervigilant. We're always on edge. So that's the image you see there on the left. So I'm going along in life, I deal with the stressors, but some people stay elevated and stressed all the time. Some people never get stressed about anything. Neither of them are good responses. Remember, the healthy response is this one. Let me go back. That's the healthy response. This is what your brain was designed to do. But because some of us deal with so much stress, so many things outside our control, our brains adjust and change. Some of them adjust to where we're too intense all the time, we're too hypervigilant all the time. Others adjust and change to where they kind of don't care about anything. Nothing stresses them out versus everything stresses them out. Neither of these are healthy responses when it comes to your brain. Now, the one on the left, that hypervigilant, sometimes that looks like we're discipline problems, like we're behavior problems, when in reality, it might be because of the stress we're under. Now, the one on the right, the person who's not really stressed about anything, they don't seem to care about anything. They look like motivation problems when it could be a result of our stress. When we manage our stressors better, we're able to behave better and we're able to be more motivated. When we manage our stressors better, how do we manage our stressors just a little bit better? We practice what's called resiliency, and I'll show you how to do that. I asked you this question in the opening quiz, and that is stress contagious? And the answer is absolutely. They did an interesting study for those of you who like this whole school education thing, who think you might want to be a teacher at some point in the future. They did a study on first grade teachers and their students. How do we measure something like cortisol, you might ask? Cortisol can be measured with saliva samples. We can give people a cheek swab, it's where they put the little thing inside your mouth. They get some saliva samples, they measure cortisol levels. This is what they found. Pretty fascinating. When the first grade teachers had elevated cortisol levels, the stress hormone, so did their kids. And here's part of the challenge for those of us who spent our whole career in education, is when kids are stressed out, that stresses out teachers. When teachers are stressed out, that stresses out kids. It's just this horrible cycle. When you're around stressed people, it will absolutely be contagious. And some of us feed off of that, which isn't a good thing as well. Okay, it's audience participation time. If you would, put both of your hands out in front of you like this, about shoulder length, palms up. Thank you very much. I can see you participating. In your left hand, we're going to put the concept of stress. Stress in your left, control in your right. Stress and control. Now, when stress is high, raise your left hand and lower your right. When stress is high, it's because by definition, control is low. High stress means that you don't have control. Now reverse them. How do you lower your stress, or how do you help someone else get a better handle on their stress? You help them get control. They never go like this. They never go like this. They're always inverse. The math word you've heard before, inverse. Meaning high stress is by definition because you don't think you have control. How do you lower your stress, or how do you help someone else lower their stress? You get control. They go in opposite directions. That's a really important idea. In fact, here's one of the most important ideas you might want to walk away from the entire session. And that is, when you feel stress and your body often tells you that you're tense and you're stressed out, or someone tells you you're stressed, the first thing you should think of is this: what can I get control over? What in my life can I control right now in order to manage my stressor just a little bit better? Now, the best case scenario, you get control over the thing that's stressing you out, but you can't always do that because sometimes it's people and you can't control people. You already know that. So what I do is I get control over something. I can control the way I think. I can control what I do with my body. There's several things I can control, and I'll show you 5 of them here in just a moment. Stress is about control. When stress is high, ask yourself, what can I get control over in order to reverse it just a little bit? Or how can I help the people around me do that very thing? Same thing. All right, so we're nerding out on cool brain stuff. Let's actually look at a human brain. This is actually a scan, a kind of imaging technique of the brain. These are called SPECT scans. If you're interested in the science, let me know later and I'll point you in the right direction. What you're looking at here is 4 different images of a brain. In the top left, you see that's a picture like we're looking up under your chin. So you see the forehead at the top, a couple of side views, and the back of the view. The top left is pictures of we're looking up under your chin. The top left and lower right, those are side views. And the bottom right, that's a top-down view, like we had a light bulb over your head. What you see here, SPECT technology just measures activity in the brain. Not so much structures and geography, but what parts of your brain are being active. Pretty cool. This is a healthy brain. This is a brain that doesn't have a lot of stress in it. If you and I had that brain, if we could get our brain scanned and it looked like that, you would say, I got a pretty good brain. That's a cool brain. That's a well-functioning brain. But what does stress do? If that's a healthy brain that doesn't have a lot of stress, this is one that does have a lot of stress. Take a look, lean in, and say, wow. This is phenomenal, phenomenal stuff. Let me tell you what you're looking at. First, note this. Those areas that look like craters or somebody scooped out some material with an ice cream scooper, those aren't physical holes in your brain that you could put a finger in. These are areas of underactivity. SPECT technology measures what's happening in the brain, what activity is happening in the brain. What you're looking at is an image of when there's high levels of stress in our life, how does that impact activity in the brain? And let's look at the one that's in the upper left, because that's the most interesting one. Again, we're looking up as if we're looking up under your chin. So the 2 big holes at the top, that's right where your forehead is, right above your eyeballs. That's the part of our brain called the prefrontal cortex. That's the part of our brain we associate with thinking and planning and impulse control. The little voice inside your head you talk to all the time, it's right there. What this tells us is that when we have a lot of stress, the part of our brain that's doing all the thinking and all the processing and all the cause and effect, you know when teachers say you need to practice higher order thinking skills, you know when teachers say that? That's how all that stuff happens right there. When you're stressed, there's activity there than when you're not stressed. That's a wow. When you look at what stress actually does biologically to our brain, it gets our attention, doesn't it? So the good news is once you lower your stress or get your stress back down to normal levels, you can actually, let me do something here, you can actually return to this state. This is not a permanent state, in other words. This is not a permanent condition. It's not like once you're stressed, your brain's ruined forever. Your brain can actually recover, and that's a cool idea. Your brain can recover from stressors. How do you recover from stressors? We start living a more healthy life, and I'll show you how to do that. Why am I sharing this with you? Because brains are cool, but it's also nice to know what stress actually does to us. Because everybody tells us, you know, you need to manage your stressors better, but they don't always tell us how to do that. I'm going to show you how to do that. Let's continue this discussion just a little bit more. So if stress is the problem, what's the answer? It's what we call resilience. Let me pause for a moment, lean in, read the comments on the screen, and then I'll tear it apart a little bit more for you. If stress is the problem, how do we deal with stress? Because people tell us to deal with stress, but they don't always tell us how. We practice resilience. We build something called resilience. It's kind of a $10 word that basically means my ability to cope. Sometimes you'll see things like persistence. Sometimes you'll hear words like grit. Have you heard people talk about grit? You need to be gritty. Well, really, I don't hate the word grit, but really grit is all about resilience. Anybody who talks about the concept of grit, where all the information really comes from is this idea of being resilient. It's the ability to bounce back when life hands you challenges. It's the ability to cope when things are difficult. Now, we all have resiliency skills. Refining them and getting a little bit better at them is our challenge. And like I said, I'll show you 5 ways to do that here in just a moment. Probably my favorite analogy for what resilience is it's like your car's shock absorbers. If you've ridden in a car before, you know that the tires are attached to an axle. The axle is attached to something called shocks. Sometimes there are springs and shocks, but those shocks and those springs, they influence how you experience the road. When you go over a really bumpy road, those shocks soften the experience. They don't change the road, they just change the way you experience the road. That's what resiliency can do for us, is kind of smooth out those difficult times in life. Doesn't make those difficult times in life disappear, it just helps us to deal with those difficult times just a little bit better. So resilience just consists of 2 things. This is simple and is powerful at the same time. Resilience consists of how I think, what I let occupy my thinking in my brain, and specific coping mechanisms I use when times are tough. The truth is, life's tough sometimes. The truth is, life is amazing and joyful at times, but life also has challenges at times as well. It's during those challenging times that we need to have some sense of resilience, some sense of how do I cope with the challenges. Resilience helps me tackle those things. And it consists of these 2 things, how I think and what I do. What I let occupy my thinking, what I let camp and live up here in my brain, and specific activities or coping mechanisms I use when times get tough. All right, quick review. It's audience participation time. No need to use the chat feature. Just let me allow you to process for just a moment. See if you can finish any or all 3 of those sentence starters. The 3 dots, the ellipses, ... just means you need to finish the sentence. What would you say stress is? What would you say resiliency is? And what might you say you need to remember? Just think, process on your own for just a moment. You have 45 seconds all on your own. Ready, set, go. So let's see if you said something like this. Stress is my body's response to when I don't have control or when I don't believe I have control. If you said something like that, you nailed it. Resiliency is my ability to deal with stressors. That's if you said something like that, you nailed that one as well. Resiliency is 2 things. If you said 2 things, you nailed it as well. And what you should remember, that's a pretty personal one, so I'll just leave that one up to you. I promised you 5 ways to deal with stress and build resilience. How do we do it? Here are those 5, and I'll give you specific mechanisms for each of those 5, specific things you can do coming your way. We practice gratitude, do this thing called reframing, focus on what I can control. I manage my emotions and I take care of my body. Those are ways that I can do this thing. When I do more of these things on a regular basis, guess what? It's easier to deal with stress because I'm being more resilient. Those 5 things are ways to do it. Now, these are not the only 5 things, but they're a really good start. Meaning if I do these things pretty consistently in my life, then stress doesn't get to me as much. So let's dig in. It's audience participation time once again. No need to use the chat feature, just ponder on this question for a moment. Right here, right now, what would you say you're grateful for? You might say, you know what, I'm grateful for my family, I'm grateful for my friends, I'm grateful for the food in the cupboard, what are you grateful for right now? Could be something small, could be something big. For example, if you just got a brand new pair of shoes and you're hyper excited about your shoes, be grateful for your shoes, it's all good. Take a moment, take about 10 seconds and identify something right here, right now that you would say, you know what, I'm grateful for this. Why does gratitude matter? Recall, resilience consists of 2 things, how I think and what I do. Gratitude is a thinking pattern. And we can do gratitude, this gratitude thing, in micro moments throughout our day, and it really helps to rethink our response to stress. Gratitude actually shows up in the brain, and I'll show you that as well. Some of the things we know gratitude does: hope, optimism, gratitude, positivity. We do these things because they impact my ability to handle stress in a very positive way. Now, we do this thing not just during certain holidays or when we receive an unexpected gift or during our birthday. Those are good times to be grateful, but we act on gratitude consistently. And when we do that, it helps us deal with stress. It releases dopamine. That's a chemical in your brain that makes you feel good. It gives me a sense of what's good in my life and what I can control. Hope, optimism, gratitude, positivity in small doses a couple of times a week will do miracles in your ability to think about and manage your stressors. There was a guy who wrote an interesting book on happiness, Sean Aker. He's a guy from Harvard University, and he merely says this: when you take yourself or when you help someone else go from a negative mood or state, we call that a state, a mood, a condition, from a negative to a neutral state or condition to a positive one, it actually impacts the efficiency of their brain. That's a pretty cool idea. If there are any educators in the session, the very next time you give your kids a test because you need their brains optimally functioning, have them do some gratitude things. If you're a student, right before you take a test, because when you take a test, you need your brain working with kind of all cylinders. All those synapses need to be holding hands and playing nice. Spend just a moment being grateful about something. It doesn't even have to be related to school or to anything related to education. Just be grateful for a moment and it frees us up, puts us in a better state. And when my brain's working more efficiently, it's easier to do well on tests. Now, extra credit bonus time. We're looking at more brains. We love brains. We love looking at brain scans. Here's your task. You're looking at 2 images of the same person's brain. See if you can tell what those 2 images are telling us. We're also looking as if we're looking up under someone's chin. So at the very top is the forehead, the very bottom is the back of the head. Take just a moment, lean in, compare those 2 images and ask yourself, what is this image? What are these 2 images trying to tell us? You have 20 seconds, give it a shot. Let's see if you said something like this. The challenge here is, what are those 2 images trying to tell us? Once again, SPECT technology, all that does is measure what areas of the brain are being active. not physical structure, so there's no physical holes anywhere, but what parts of the brain are really active and what are not so active. So an individual went to a guy named Dr. Daniel Amen. A-M-E-N is his name, like you say in church, amen, right? That's his last name. And she said to him, I'm doing some research. I'm writing a book on the power of gratitude, and I want to find out what's happening in my brain when I'm being grateful. Dr. Amen says, that's brilliant. Let's check it out. Now, Dr. Amen does a lot of work with SPEC technology. In fact, he's the world's leading authority on the use of this imagery. So they hook the person up to the machine, they put her in, and they say, during round 1, that's the image you see there on the left, we want you to focus on what you're grateful for. Now, some of us might call it prayer, some of us might call it meditation, some of us might call it contemplation. Just sit and think what you're grateful for. That's the image you see on the left. They pulled this lady out, they looked at the data, and they said, that's a healthy brain. The brain on the left is the one that any single one of us would love to have. But then Dr. Amen said, you know what we have to do in science is in science, we compare things. That's what science does. You compare different scenarios, different factors. We have to compare something. This time we're going to do another round, round 2. This time when you go in and we hook you up and we measure the activity in your brain, I want you to focus on your fears, your anxieties, and your worries. That's the one on the right. He nicknamed it the hateful, grateful brain. When you're being grateful versus when you're being anxious and negative and worrisome. How does it impact your brain is a brilliant question. And you can see the areas of less activity in your brain when you're being anxious and worried and stressed out, right? What's most notable on that one on the right, you see a white arrow pointed to, that's actually the left temporal lobe, because in photographs, you know, things are reversed. That's actually the left temporal lobe. That's the part of the brain right here. Why does that matter? Why is less activity in the left temporal lobe matter? That's the part of our brain we associate with spoken words, speech. Have you ever noticed in your own life that when you're stressed, the words don't always come out quite right? That sometimes it's hard to find the right words, but when you're calm and you're centered and you're rested, it's easier to find the right words to communicate, but when you're stressed, it's harder. It's a brain thing. You want to learn how to communicate better with the people around you? Get a better handle on your stress. That's a good way to do it. So we practice gratitude. That's the first of these 5 ways I promised you. And there's tons of other evidence that supports the same exact thing. I'm not going to talk about all of this. If you like this stuff, you can access it on your own. But there's a lot of evidence that says this. When we practice gratitude, we do a much better job managing our stressors. Gratitude, even in micro moments, a couple of times a week, can do amazing things to manage your stress. Now, earlier I asked you the question, what are you grateful for? There's a lot of different ways you can ask questions about what you're grateful or you're hopeful or optimistic about. You don't always have to answer the same question, what am I grateful for, 7 times a week. There's all sorts of variations, like what's a small little luxury that you're really happy that's in your life? Or what's something cool and interesting you're looking forward to doing this summer? In small moments, gratitude, hope, optimism, positivity, we do these things not just because they make us feel better, but because they actually impact the functioning of our brain. That's a cool thing. Here's another way to look at it, and this is a really powerful idea. Another way to look at it is every single one of us in life, we have both headwinds and tailwinds. If you've ever ridden a bicycle and you've had a tailwind, that's the wind at your back, it makes pedaling a little bit easier. It makes the riding just a little bit easier. Those are tailwinds. If you've ever ridden a bike into a headwind or tried running into a headwind, you have to kind of put your head down and you have to pedal a little bit harder and you're jostled around a little bit more. Headwinds make pedaling more difficult. Tailwinds make pedaling easier. Now, here's the truth. In your life right now, you have both. You have both things that help you along and things that hinder. Things that make life a little bit more challenging, those are your headwinds. You also have things in your life that make it a little bit easier. Those are your tailwinds. Now, recognizing tailwinds, the things that help you out, usually they're people, if we're honest. Recognizing those does not ignore the challenges, but what it says is this. Yes, you have some challenges in your life, no doubt. We all do. But you know what? You probably also have some things that are helping you. And the more you recognize the helping, the tailwinds, the better off you are. It doesn't mean you don't have challenges. It doesn't ignore them. It just says, you know what? I'm pretty blessed and lucky to have these things in my life also. Because the truth is, sometimes when we're stressed, we go totally negative. We just focus all on the negative. Everything that's wrong, everything that won't change, everything that's difficult, and we tend to give up. But if we step back occasionally and say, you know what? I do have some things that are helping me along the way. And as I showed you in the previous slide, that one, it actually impacts the functioning of your brain. This isn't just stuff nice to do if you have time. This is stuff that if you do it consistently, it actually impacts how well your brain functions. That's a pretty cool idea. So how do we do this? Number one, we practice gratitude. In the remaining time, we have about a half hour or so. Let's see how many of the other four we can discuss. Let's see how many of them we can dig into. Remember this, stress is all about control. When stress is high, it's because by definition, control is low. If you want to increase your resilience, increase your control. Lower your stress by increasing control. Audience participation time, here you go. See if you can figure out what two words go in each of those two blank lines. I mentioned this, resiliency consists of two things. What are they? See if you can figure out what words go in each of those two blank lines. The first one starts with the letter T. The second one starts with the letter D. If you said how we think for number one, you nailed it. If you said what we do for the second one, spot on, you got that right. It's how we think and what we do. Now, the second easy way to practice resilience, I mentioned it earlier, there's a ton of ways to be resilient and practice resilience. I'm just giving you 5 because we don't have a ton of time together. This one is called reframing. What is reframing? Reframing is choosing to look at something differently in your life. Now, you might have also mentioned over my shoulder, there's a picture of a one-room schoolhouse right up there on my wall. My mom is an artist. She painted that for me a number of years ago. I love that painting. It's one of my favorites. If you take a beautiful painting and put a nice frame around it, it influences how you see the painting. Doesn't change the painting, it just changes how you look at it. If you take a beautiful painting like that and put a lousy frame around it, that also influences the way you see it. Doesn't actually change anything, just influences the way we look at something. Reframing is simply this. In the situations that you're faced with, how do you talk to yourself about it? Do you talk about it as if they're horrible things, it's the end of the world and nothing's going to change and things are horrible? Or do you reframe it as a learning opportunity or an opportunity to get stronger or better or to help someone else? Reframing is just this. It's rethinking the situation in front of us. That's all. It doesn't change the situation, it changes the way I think about it. Because resiliency consists of how I think and what I do. So when I rethink, that's the thing that happens up here, the challenge in front of me, that's what we call reframing. It's essentially, it's how you talk to yourself. Every single one of us talk to ourselves. It's totally normal human thing. So when you talk to yourself, that voice inside your head you have a dialogue with, that's a normal thing. It's how we speak to ourselves. Do we speak to ourselves in a positive way or in a negative way? That's the question. I'll show you a couple of ways to do that just a little bit differently. And reframing is especially important when we're facing difficult times. Doesn't change the difficult time, but it changes the way I look at that difficult time. And when I think about something differently, it actually impacts my brain and makes me more healthy. So how might we choose to do that? A couple different ways. One is start telling yourself that you get to do things rather than you have to do things. It could be as simple as an assignment that a teacher gave you. Instead of saying, oh, I got to go do this, say, well, I get to go do this so that I can show the teacher how much I've learned and how much I've grown. I'll be honest with you, it's a little bit of a cheat. But start telling yourself that you get to do something, because when you get to do something, that's a privilege. When you have to do something, that's a responsibility. Start telling yourself, you know what, I get to go to work, rather than, oh, I got to go to work. See, the way we talk to ourselves really matters. When you're in the middle, that's the second bullet there. When you're in the middle of a challenging time, start telling yourself things like, you know what, this isn't going to last forever. Yeah, it stinks right now. Yeah, it's horrible right now, but this is going to pass. The truth is, whatever negative things we're experiencing right now, it's going to pass. It's going to go away. Well, there's a flip side to that coin as well. Whatever positive you're experiencing right now is probably not going to last forever either. But when we understand this, it's hard to understand when we're a little bit younger, but nothing is going to last forever. Whatever challenge I'm facing right now, it's going to be over soon. Maybe not as soon as I want, but it will be over. Just tell yourself, you know what? This stinks right now. I don't like it, but it's not going to be my life forever. It's a chapter or a page in a chapter in a book and not the whole book. That's a powerful idea. Start telling yourselves, because reframing is a practice of talking to yourself just a little bit differently. Here's another way to look at it. Is Dr. Edith Grotberg just says, do something like this. Remind yourself of who you are and what you have in front of you. No doubt, we all have our challenges. We all have the things in our life that are kind of cruddy that we don't want to have to deal with. But you know what? You've got some good as well. Now, we're not going to take the time to do it now, but I would encourage you sometime in the near future, just sit down and write it out. What do you have? What external supports do you have that make life a little bit better for you? Maybe it's just one person you identify right now, but that's a good start. Remind yourself of some of your inner strengths. Are you persistent? Are you caring? Are you loyal? Are you hardworking? Are you a good critical thinker? What are your internal strengths? And then also remind yourself what you have ability to do. You might say, you know what? I'm bilingual. That's a great ability. What do you have? What do you have? What are you? And what can you do? Remind yourself that you are an amazing person. Even though you got challenges, you're a pretty darn good version of yourself. Speaking of reframing, here's an example of reframing in action. I saw this when I was on a trip up to Colorado. Remember, you say to yourself, I get to do stuff rather than I have to do stuff. Don't tell yourself, oh, I got to go to practice. Oh, I have to do this. I get to. I don't have to work out. I get to work out. One more example of reframing. Now, I mentioned when we were looking at brain scans earlier, Dr. Daniel Amen, that's a picture of him and his wife. They said this. It's a brilliant but super easy thing to do. This is good for kids, adults, and everybody in between. Start noticing more what you like about other people than what you dislike. And communicate that to that person. At the very least, tell yourself in your mind, you know what? There's things about this person I dislike. That's true of everybody you'll ever meet in your whole life. Everybody you ever meet in your whole life, you'll be able to identify things that, I don't like that about that person. But start focusing and noticing more what you appreciate and what you like about the person and communicate that. See, this sometimes people think this is like touchy-feely stuff. This is actually hardcore brain stuff. Communicate it. So you don't have to be sugary. You don't have to go up to a parent and give them a hug and say, oh, I love you so much, and be all sugary and gooey, although your parent might love it if you did that. You don't have to be that kind of touchy-feely kind of person. You just have to start recognizing and communicating more of what you like about someone rather than what you dislike. And Dr. Amen suggests that when you do that, it releases a couple of cool chemicals in your brain. Serotonin, that helps regulate your mood. Oxytocin helps you bond with other people. Both of those chemicals in your brain will make you a much nicer person, much easier to get along with. Just when we start noticing and communicating something we like about someone versus what we don't like about them. Here's been our track. How do we manage stress? Because stress impacts the brain. 5 easy ways to do it. Practice lots of gratitude in your life. Even little moments, even as short as maybe 10, 15 seconds, it just centers us. Practice a lot of reframing, especially when we're in the middle of challenges, because resilience is how I think and how I talk to myself. Let's focus on the next one. This one is going to be audience participation time as well. So in order to prepare for this one, if you can, get something to write with, a pen or a pencil, and something to write on. It could be a sticky note, a full sheet of paper, doesn't matter what it is. So prepare yourself, and in just a moment, I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of writing. Not a ton of writing, just a little bit. So find yourself a pen or a pencil, and then somewhere to do a write. Could be a little piece of paper, could be a big piece of paper, doesn't matter what it is. That's coming up in just a moment. Focus, this is the next idea. Focus on what you can control, because stress and control go in opposite directions. When stress is high, it's because control is low. How do I get a better handle on my stress? I control something. See, a constant focus on what is out of your control, constant focus on what is beyond your control, the first word that goes in that blank line there is beyond, will make you absolutely miserable. Focusing on all those things I can't control stresses me out. After all, if you could control something, it doesn't stress you out. When we focus on those things that we can control, we're practicing being resilient. Focus on those things in your mind and in your doing, on those things that you have some control over. So Max Planck, you probably maybe never have heard that word, that name before. This gentleman, he won a Nobel Prize a number of years ago for physics. He said this: when you let your mind occupy certain things, it'll change your life. You let your mind occupy and focus on good things, opportunities, it'll change the way you look at things. Another way to look at this thing of focusing on control is there's a Texas-based minister named Chuck Swindoll. He's famous for saying something like, life is about 10% what happens to you and 90% how you respond. Neil Parshika wrote an interesting book, and he says it this way: the 90% is really made up of how you choose to respond to the challenging 10%. Life is really about how we choose to respond more than anything else. So I promised you audience participation time. Here's your task. In just a moment, I'll pause and give you about 3 or 4 minutes to just focus and process. On that piece of paper, first, duplicate what you see right in the middle of the screen. Just do a T chart. Just write a big T. Just duplicate that T chart. At the top of the left-hand side of the T chart, put the word control. On the top of the right, put can't control. 2 words on the right, 1 word on the left. So duplicate a T chart. On the top of the left, put the word control. On the top of the right, can't control. Let me give you a moment to set it up, then I'll tell you what we're going to do with this. On the left is control, on the right is can't control. Here's your job. I'll give you about 3 minutes just to go into your own private world. You're not going to put anything in the chat. You're not going to share any of this information. It's only for yourself. Take a moment and think right now in your life, what are things that you can control? What are things that you can't control? Let me give you a couple of examples of where to start. Under the stuff I can't control, you know what? I can't control other people. You might put other people. Truth is, you can't control anything but yourself. I can't control how nice people are going to be to me, but I can control how I respond when they're not nice to me. So here's your job. Think of every aspect of your life: your family life, your friends, your work, your schoolwork. Think of your future, everything you can think of. And here's your job. 3 minutes, all on your own. Stuff you can control, stuff you can't control. Brainstorm both categories. 3 minutes. I'll turn the camera off and let you go to it. Ready, set, begin. Go ahead and come to a stopping point, please. Knowing that we can't control things like other people or their responses is actually a pretty empowering thing. It's actually a pretty empowering perspective. For example, if I work as a server at a restaurant, I can't control the size of the tip someone leaves me. But you know what I can control is how grateful I am regardless of the size of the tip. There's a lot of things I can control, and most of them center on me. When I focus on everything outside my control, like other people's bad behavior, I tend to be miserable. I don't want to be miserable. I don't want to be the cause of my own stress. I want to be the cause of my own happiness. And I can do so by focusing more on what I can control rather than what I cannot control. All right, in the time we have left, 2 more to go. I think we can do it. I promised you 5. We looked at the first 3. Here they are. Let's see how well we can do the next 2 in the last few minutes that we're together. The next one is to manage our emotions. But before I talk more about managing emotions, I have a question for you. Just a processing questions. Think about this for just a moment. Why didn't I say that resilient people or resiliency is about controlling their emotions, right? Because after all, didn't Dr. Harris said control and resiliency and control and, right? Isn't stress and control? Isn't control a good thing? If that's true, why didn't I say that you should control your emotions? Why did I use the word manage and not control if control is such a good thing? Ponder on that question for the next 10 or 15 seconds, and then I'll give you some insight. First, know this. To be human is just to have lots of emotions on any given day. Emotions are just who we are. Emotions drive us as human beings. They actually have a biological and a brain reason. We don't have time to go into deep dive into those reasons, but know this. Having emotions is just normal. Being ecstatic and excited about things is normal. Being kind of depressed and anxious about things is kind of normal. But we also have a lot of ability to influence our emotions. Why didn't I say that we should control our emotions? Because the truth is you can't. You cannot control your emotions. You can influence them, and you can recognize when you have an emotion, like a negative emotion, and then influence yourself into a better emotion. But the truth is, most of us don't wake up in the morning choosing to be ticked off or upset or angry. Something happens to us, and we have a corresponding emotions. Emotions in your brain and in your biology happen super fast, and most of the time they're subconscious, meaning we're not choosing negative emotions. For example, you probably didn't wake up this morning thinking, I'm going to choose to get irritated at my little brother. Your little brother does something which results in you feeling irritated. Your choice then is, how do I manage that emotion, that irritation, to a better spot for my health and for my relationship with my brother? Because the truth is, you cannot control your emotions. What you can do is recognize them and then say to yourself, this is the emotion I'm having. It's probably not the healthiest emotion right now, and I'm going to choose to do something different. I'm going to reframe the situation, for example. I'm going to be grateful for something, for example. I'm going to get out and take a walk and do something physical. I'm going to manage myself into a better emotion rather than being stuck. Because although the emotion is there and it might feel pretty strong, you're not stuck in that emotion. Emotions are fleeting, meaning they happen quickly and they go away quickly as well. And you can manage yourself into a better one. Speaking of emotions, because if we had time, we could spend hours and hours talking about emotions and the role of emotions in their brain. But since we don't have that, let me give you one idea. And that is to manage the ants. Every single one of you have ants in your brain. Did you know you have automatic negative thoughts? We're going to call them ants. You have ants floating around in your brain. Here's your job. First, read what's on the screen on the left, then look at the right and look at some examples of what we would call automatic negative thoughts. Read the first on the left, then on the right. So I introduced you to Dr. Amen earlier. He and his wife wrote that book, and they say this is one of the most empowering, positive messages you may ever hear. Just because you have a thought does not make it true, nor does it mean it needs to stick around in your head. You can control what stays there. We all have thoughts that jump into our mind that are inappropriate, weird, strange, negative. Sometimes I know you've had this happen to you before, where a thought pops into your mind and you're like, I'm glad no one knows what's happening in my brain right now because that is so weird. We all have those strange, inappropriate, and negative thoughts. Here's that empowering message. Just because you have a thought, A, doesn't make it true. B, doesn't mean it needs to stick around. I can control what thoughts let camp up here, because what thoughts I let live in my brain for a while will influence how my brain functions. I showed you proof of that by looking at brain scans. Just because you have a thought doesn't make it true. And a lot of us are drawn in with these automatic negative thoughts because of the way we've been treated since we were little. Things like, I'm an idiot, why would I even try this? Or things like, I can't do math, why should I even try doing my homework because I'm no good at math? We have these automatic negative thoughts that just kind of build there. Don't let them live, don't let them hang out. We all have them, we all battle ants. I'll show you a couple ways to work to get rid of them. First, you need to know this. Having automatic negative thoughts is kind of normal, but what will make you abnormal in a very good way is getting rid of them. Just say to yourself this: not everything that I think is true. Not everything that I think needs to stick around in my thinking for very long. Here is another thing that the Amens say. They quote, and you see that there in blue, is that thoughts lie. Read the rest of their quote after thoughts lie. I don't know about you, but when I first read this quote, I thought to myself, there's like about 1,000 people I need to share this with. Just because you have a thought doesn't mean it's true. Just because you have a thought doesn't mean it needs to stick around. And your thoughts lie to you. Did you know that? These automatic negative thoughts, they're just thoughts. They're not who you are. Emotions are just emotions. They're not who you are. They're not the core of your being. Your negative thoughts aren't you, because they're lying to you. It's when we let them just kind of camp out and we start believing them, when we start believing things like, I'm not attractive, nobody will like me, nobody will want to go out with me, or I'm so stupid, right? When we start thinking those and we own those, that's what's going to steal your joy in life. It's probably better to say, you know what? Thoughts come, sometimes they're stupid, and I'm going to let those stupid ones go. And I'm going to listen to the truth, because automatic negative thoughts are lies. So how do we get rid of ants? What's a couple of ways to do that? Let me go back one. So how might we get rid of ants? One way is to just write them down, put them on a piece of paper. You don't have to share this with anybody, but if you're challenged in your mental thinking with some of these, write it down and look at it on a piece of paper and ask yourself, look at it and say, see, when you look at something on paper, it sometimes changes from a thing into something more concrete. And then ask yourself things like, am I really sure that I'm stupid and I can't do math? Am I really sure of this? Then, as you're challenged, just challenge yourself first, externalize it, put it on paper. Am I really totally 100% sure that I'm unlovable? Am I really totally 100% sure that I could never improve this relationship? Whatever that automatic negative thought you're struggling with, because we all have them, we all struggle with them. In the process of doing that, reach out to someone that you know and trust. It could be a trusted friend, could be an adult at your school, could be a coworker if you have a job, someone that you know will truly give you good advice. Hopefully you have someone like that in your life. You probably do, you just need to go find them. And ask them questions like, okay, this is what I'm struggling with. Am I seeing it correctly? Or what else do I need to think about? Ask for advice. One of the wisest things you can ever do is to seek advice from someone who's more wise than you are. That's true of every aspect of your life, regardless how old you are, is seek out people who know stuff you don't know and ask them to help you get better. Try reframing, do something physical as well. All of those will help. Okay, time-wise, we're doing well. Quick review, once again, here's your job. Taking about the next 90 seconds, see how many of those you can finish, sentence starters you can finish. Gratitude, reframing, control, and one way to manage emotions. See how many of those you can answer in your own mind, not out loud. How many of those you can answer in the next 90 seconds. Ready to begin. In the next 5 minutes or so, let's add one more piece to the puzzle. Then I've built in a few minutes at the end to have a little bit of a Q&A. If you have any questions, we'll dig into that. Question for you as we begin. The last thing we're going to do is talk about taking care of the physical health, my physical health, taking care of the body. Question before we begin, it's right there in the red. What's one scientifically valid, super easy thing you can do right here, right now? Well, after our session is over, in other words, to make yourself happier, calmer, smarter, better overall. There's one thing you can do that will have an immediate impact on your ability to be happy. What do you think it is? Guess, make a prediction in your mind. What do you think Dr. Harris is about to tell you? If you're wondering, well, a scientifically validated way to get healthier and smarter and happier, well, we're talking about physical health. So you might be thinking it has to do something with my body. Here's the answer. It's go for a walk. One of the easiest things you can do when you're feeling stressed and anxious is to get outside and go for a walk. Even if it's 110 degrees outside, just take lots of water with you and don't spend a lot of time out there. Go for a walk. Remember, stress and control are related. One of the easiest things you can do when you're feeling the tension and the anxiety and the overload, the stress, is do something physical. Recall this. When you're stressed, when you have a perception that something's outside your control, your body releases cortisol and adrenaline. Those two things combined are really good in the short term. One thing that you may never have heard about cortisol, the stress hormone, is that it rushes energy via blood flow and oxygen to your core muscles and your thighs. Why? Because those two things, cortisol and adrenaline, want you to take physical action. The worst thing you can do when you're feeling stressed is to sit there. And I know you've experienced it. You're stressed, you're anxious, you're worried. And when you hunker down, you just get more stressed and anxious and worried. And you get more and more tense. The best thing you can do when you feel the tension and the overload coming on is do something physical. Go for a walk, go for a run, get on the bike, lift weights, do something, because that releases all that pent up energy in your system. Cortisol and adrenaline are designed for you to take action. And when you don't take physical action, it gets worse. And we get tense and we get sick and we get overwhelmed and we get crabby. Do something physical. The answer to the question on the screen is take a walk. Now, when it comes to health, there's a lot of different things we could look at. We could look at sleep, diet, exercise. All of these things matter, but we're going to just look at one of those three because we don't have a bunch of time. But just know this, what you put into your body matters. In fact, I think if I remember right, there's at least one session in this conference talking about the power of food and diet. Also know this, what I do with my body matters. How I exercise matters. Let's talk just briefly about sleep. Here are 3 or 4 things rather that we know about the power of sleep. Here's your job. Take about the next 30 seconds and read those 4 things just to yourself. The take-home message is this: sleep is good. Do not sacrifice sleep. One of the best things you can do for your mental health and your ability to manage stress is get good sleep. Don't sacrifice sleep. It's really, really important. When we're teenagers, we need probably around 9 to 10 hours of sleep a night. When we're adults, it's probably closer to 7 or 8, but we need good sleep in order to process and have our brains process appropriately in order to manage stress. Here's a quick question for you. It's audience participation time once again. The Nagasaki sisters wrote a great book called Burnout. They asked this question. Here's your job. What's the answer? A, B, C, or D? How much rest do you need every day, including sleep, in order to kind of be your best self? How much rest do you need every day, including sleep? Is it A, B, C, or D? Take a guess. What do you think the answer is? I see one of you saying A. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Sophia. I think that was a D, if I know that. If I don't know my sign language well enough. Sorry about that. So here's, well, first of all, it's kind of an unfair question because I didn't tell you what we mean by rest. The Nagasaki sisters say this: you need to devote a certain percentage of your day, including sleep, to what we call rest. Rest are things that energize you, that bring energy back into the system. You are a big battery. Think of yourself as a big battery, right? All day long, you're giving your energy to other things and people, and you're doing stuff. Whether you're working or whether you're working on a project for school or whether you're babysitting, whatever you're doing, all day long, you're giving your energy. You have to re-energize. You have to pull energy back into the system. Sleep is part of the equation of pulling energy back, but they also say, you know what, rest are things that are going to energize you and things that you enjoy. For some of it, it's reading. For some of it might be playing a video game. For some of it, it's having a meal with a loved one. Things that energize you and bring energy and joy back into the system. This is what they say. They say the answer is actually B. Take a look at what they said about 42%. The take-home message is this: take care of yourself. Get good sleep, take care of what you put into the body, and take care of what you do with the body, and it'll be much easier to manage the stressors in your life. Okay, those were the 5. Practice gratitude, reframing, focusing on what you can control, manage those emotions, and take care of your health. I notice we are right up to the end point, and I just want us to end by saying this. If you want to know more, if you need more information, if you want to share ideas, if you want to kind of dig into this nerdy brain stuff a little bit more, a couple different ways you can get a hold of me. Email is probably the easiest one. I just want to end by saying thank you for devoting part of your day to this session. If I can be of help to you going forward in any way, you know how to get in contact with me. I appreciate you all very much. Thank you for the claps.